Hi everyone, my name is Maddie and you are now watching a personal finance video, and I'm going to give you all of my juicy tips and notes about personal finance that I have learned so far. And it really comes from a place of me wanting to set out on this mission to be independent. And in order to be independent, you need to learn finances. I have rent, I have expenses, I have food, trips, traveling, budgeting, saving, student loan debts, you name it, I got it. And okay, maybe the one thing I don't have right now is a car. So I can't relate on gas prices right now with the crazy inflation that we've been seeing, up to what, $8 for gas, $6. And I don't envy anyone with a car. So without further ado, though, let me sort of dive into the personal finance notes that I have put together for you through a presentation. Oh, sorry. Okay, personal finance notes, and my name is Madison Fujii. Let's move on. But before we do, be sure to follow me on Instagram at MADIFUJ across all social media. So these are the books that I have been reading. And, if you're a young person, let's say you're in your teens or early 20s, these are sort of the books that I find digestible. I will say The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham is a little dense and intense, and I would highly recommend listening to the audio version first, but then going back to buy the physical book and then use Post-it notes to sort of bookmark really key points, things to highlight, whatever, just because there's a lot of great critical information. It's just so dense that it would require maybe some, light reading the first time and then more active, deep reading the second time. One book that I do recommend you start with, though, is Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Robert Kiyosaki talks about his own personal experience by watching his father and his friend's father as these two sort of dichotomies, one being an educated person who is taught and trained to be a good employee but doesn't get to access a level of financial freedom that the rich dad does. And the rich dad is the quote unquote kind of more uneducated one, but he's the one who sort of has the street smarts, the business knowledge, the people skills, and so forth to take on that entrepreneurial route to get themselves to financial freedom. And he teaches Robert, or excuse me, I guess you use last names, right? He teaches Kiyosaki sort of like the ins and outs of business. And as a result, Robert Kiyosaki was able to make a name for himself in the finance world. So this book is really a nice introduction to anybody who sort of wants to come from that childlike learning mode and perspective, because he does talk about his experiences through the lens of him being a child himself. Principles by Ray Dalio is sort of more of like this corporate business startup guidebook on how to deal with people and relationships. He is he is the founder of the largest hedge fund in the world, Ray Dalio. And he sort of uses that book, but the more interesting one released more recently that kind of ties into the socioeconomic landscape into context is The Principles for the Changing World Order. This talks about economics at a global scale. So not just talking about economics in the United States, but also how the gross domestic product, the GDP, the output per capita is declining compared to that of China, which is rising. And he talks about sort of like why this is happening, how it's happened before, and kind of like touching on what to think about it all. So it's very dense as well, with lots of charts and things. So I do recommend maybe finding a physical copy but if you'd like, the audio version is adequate as well. Last but not least, I threw this in here. I haven't finished it, but it's High Performance Habits by Brendon Burchard. The one thing about this is that, things like books like Atomic Habits just show consistency winning in life. It's about not creating daunting things, but about finding the things you can do day in and day out to get you what you want. And Burchard does include sort of like this interactive element. So you'll just have to read it to find out what that is. So without further ado, I really want to get into the 10 key takeaways, which is the meat and potatoes of this episode on how to do personal finance, how to think, how to act, excuse me. And so I would really just love to take you guys through this so that you can extract value and take notes yourself. So I really recommend getting out a piece of paper and think about how you can apply each of these 10 key takeaways into your own life. Think about what you're struggling with currently. Are you struggling with savings? Are you struggling with paying your bills? Are you struggling with knowing where to put your money or other things? Either way, this is situated around you and yourself, improving yourself and investing in yourself. So in no particular order, starting with number 1 for the 10 key takeaways is 1, don't try to time the market, focus on time in the market. So what this means is that, okay, cryptocurrency like Bitcoin and Ethereum might be down right now. So yes, it's a great time to buy in, but also don't over fixate on buying when it's just the right conditions or selling when it's just the right conditions. We've all heard buy low, sell high, but timing the market is a really tricky game. No one can predict what the market will do. So that's really important, is that no matter what people say, no matter what headlines say, or even the top experts in the world like Ray Dalio, he even got it wrong before. So don't try to get fancy with timing when to buy and when to sell, even though there are general principles to abide. But if you're in it for the long run, then just focus on how long you spent in the market. And just like you may have heard before as well, if you look at a graph of the S&P 500 over time, it's only climbed higher and higher in terms of stock price and returns. So the longer you stay, the higher your return that you have, that you can yield from that investment. So time in the market versus timing the market. Okay, relating exactly to what I just said is number 2, the key is to buy low and sell high when possible, or buy low and hold. So that's a strategy as well, is to just buy low and hold because you don't want to cash out anytime soon. You want to just see your investment compound over time. And then maybe you have more of a 10 to 20 year time horizon. So depending on what your time horizon will be, you can either buy low and hold or buy low and sell high. Number three is that diversification is the key to combat the risk of losing your money. Ray Dalio talks about this a lot, and I know some other people talk about this a lot as well. How do you minimize your downside, but not necessarily ruining your upside? So how do you protect yourself from losing diversification? If you can diversify your risk, you don't put all of your eggs in one basket, or AKA into one asset, or to one company, or to one stock. So let's pretend that you want to buy a share of Apple. Well, if you're going to buy a share of Apple, you might as well buy a share of other tech stocks while you're at it. And while we're on that note, why just invest into tech stocks? What other industries can you invest in, like the healthcare industry? Maybe you also invest into more healthcare related stocks, consumer stocks, retail, energy. Diversifying your risk means that when one industry kind of has a tough quarter or a tough year, then you won't be losing money because you've also invested into other industries that might be yielding more profit this year, higher returns this year. So if you can diversify your risk, then if something breaks, then you have other sort of assets, asset classes, and places that you have put your money so that you can still, reap some type of reward when dividends are paid out and as time continues on. So the number 4 is actually really important and something I'm personally trying to get better at because, we all kind of suffer from the herd mentality. And so when a group of people are doing something, sometimes we think they're right, even when we know they're wrong. And psychology has tested and proved this. I could go into a specific study, but there is a line test in which one person had to either decide to say the right answer or go along with the answer that everybody else gave. And it showed that even when they knew what the right answer was, they provided an answer to the instructor that just basically copied what everybody else had said because there is power in numbers. So the one thing that can make you stand out is if you go against the grain and you think like an independent person, even when there are lots of people who say, this is the time to sell, this is the time to buy, and all that good stuff. So number 4, without further ado, is when people are fearful, don't be fearful, be greedy, which is the opposite. But then when people are greedy, be fearful. So when people are taking and taking and taking, that's when you should be a little bit more reserved and, stand back a bit and lay low. But when people are fearful and the market is bearish, that's the time to be bullish. And then when people are bullish and the market is high, then that's the time to be bearish. So when buying the market at a low price, that means people are scared. But that's precisely the time to be greedy and buy in. And the vice versa, and the reverse is true. So that's all this is saying. And maybe this is a takeaway for life as well. But overall, this does apply specifically in the context of a bull versus a bear market and when to be bullish versus when to be bearish. Number 5 is when people are greedy, be fearful. So yeah, I think that number 4 and 5 are literally the same. So when the market is high, don't buy. Instead, if you have any investment, hold on to it or sell it. So it depends on your strategy, right? Like if you want to see returns now, maybe you sell. And if you predict that, in the next 5 years, whatever your time horizon, and you want to cash out and you predict that it'll be bearish, then maybe you sell now, knowing that, it will be lower if you wait. So it really depends on your time horizon, like I said, because if you have a longer time horizon, you're going to want to hold. But in the event that people are greedy and the market is high, maybe you should sell. So really think about that. And number 6 is kind of funny because we use the terms fearful and greed, but it's not really about that emotional thinking. It's just sort of an adjective to describe behavior. When it comes to how you think, though, you don't want to think out of a place of fear or doubt. You don't want to invest out of fear or doubt. So you don't want to invest out of FOMO, fear of missing out. And you don't want to make investment choices like selling out of doubt because you're unsure of the future. So really just make sure that you have a strategy in place and a playbook that you can stick by. That way, in times of uncertainty or ambiguity, you can still know what to do because you've made a plan. So unlike when people are fearful, be greedy, and when people are greedy, be fearful, those are behavior terms, whereas this is more of like, don't be emotional and try to come from a place of logic, neutrality, and research and science purely. Number 7, invest in yourself first before you pay your expenses and debts. This one is also kind of like a reverse psychology, something you wouldn't quite expect, just like the fearful and greedy dichotomy I described. So, when you get some money and you have debts to pay and expenses to pay, sometimes you want to spend your paycheck or however you make your income on that first, because those are the things with those daunting, punishments if you don't. If you don't pay down your debt, then really bad consequences can follow. If you don't pay rent, bad consequences like eviction can follow, healthcare, all that good stuff, right? And so it's counterintuitive, but the reason you want to invest in yourself first before you pay down your expenses and debts is so that you are consciously putting yourself in a position to fill up your own cup before you try to fill up other people's cups. Remember, when you're paying for a product, a service, when you're paying rent, when you're paying insurance, etc., yes, you're exchanging it for some value, but you're also in the control seat because you're the one with the money. So you want to make sure that you're making your money work for you by being incredibly strategic on how you can cut down your debt, cut down your expenses as much as possible, and maximize the money you put towards investments and assets that grow your wealth over time. So investing in yourself can also mean assets like your education. It can mean assets such as maybe some type of healthcare related expense. These are things that are going to pay off in the long run and not necessarily provide instant gratification like buying takeout, but perhaps something like your 401k will compound over time, grow your wealth, so that way when you're ready to retire, you have more money than you would have had you not invested in that. So being strategic about the long run is really kind of where this investment piece of advice comes from. You know, your expenses and your debts are important and you don't want to miss out on any critical fees there. But if you want to get yourself into a place of financial freedom, you really need to rewire your brain to put yourself first. And you want to be able to get yourself out of that debt cycle. If you were to put a percent of your paycheck every single month into an investment account that compounds over time, then you can get yourself out of living paycheck to paycheck. You can get yourself out of having to work a 9 to 5 at all times. You might provide more cushion for yourself, an emergency fund for yourself. You can provide for yourself, but you can only do that and get out of working for other people and paying things off for other people by prioritizing yourself literally, even when you run the risk of, not being able to pay an expense or a debt. You can always refinance your debts and you can always cut down on your expenses, but why cut into your investments? Why not maximize that? So really think about this one, because this one is the thing that I think made me value myself more and realize that if I don't have me at the end of the day, nobody else does, because no one cares about you and really should care about you as much as you should about yourself. And it isn't meaning that to be selfish, it's just that you should take care of yourself. No one else can fill that role. So that's number 7. Number 8, make more than you spend and have as many assets as you can and as few liabilities as possible. This is highly related to number 7, guys, because you want to have as many assets as possible by paying yourself first and investing in yourself before you pay down any other expenses for the month. And when you do that, you maximize the amount that you can put towards those assets. And then when you do that, you can kind of cut out whatever other money you have left over to spend on other things like your expenses, debts, and then if any liabilities, then you have that as well. And then when you make more than you spend, that means you just cut down the money going out by creating these savings accounts, creating these investment accounts, creating these assets that can create more money. Liabilities are also things like, for example, a car. There are things that eat away at your money each month. Credit card debt that eats away at your money every month when you don't pay down your credit right away. So there are things that are liabilities and there are things that are assets. People can be liabilities, people who spend your money, but there is no return or there's no value being exchanged. People can be assets as well. They can bring you more money, more than you invested initially. So think about the people in your life as well, man. Like, think about the people, the things you own, the things you entertain, the things you go out of your way to do each and every day. And your behavior, your possessions, your material items, are they adding or subtracting from your overall net worth? And I mean this in both a financial sense and a well-being sense. So think about that. Number 9, do your research on individual stock choices based on how the CEO runs the company, their financial health, and ensure the company pays dividends to its shareholders. This is a typical piece of advice that I think is incredibly important because I know that for me, when I go into a job, it's really difficult to stay at that job unless I respect the manager or the person in charge, right? And so the same thing applies as like investing your time and your money into a stock. You want to make sure that whoever is running the show is respectable, someone who knows what they're doing, and you want to make sure that company is also in good financial standing. Look at their balance sheet. Are they spending more than they're saving? Are they making more than they're spending on whatever costs associated with the business? And then you also want to look for signs that they are rewarding the people who are shareholders. Dividends, companies that pay dividends. So if you can find all 3 of these things, then you're really in a good position to consider purchasing this stock. Last but not least, number 10. Number 10 is to know the difference between speculative stocks and more safe options. So higher risk, high reward. Cryptocurrency is still a speculative stock. It's something that doesn't have as big of a market cap as the media hypes it up to be. However, it's still speculative, even though it can bring you high yield, high return, maybe 10 years down the road. So people can often opt for safe options as well. Things that have low volatility, but it's low risk, meaning low reward as well. So index funds like the S&P 500, NYSE, and the NASDAQ. So these are funds that have a collection of companies. So the S&P 500 is the top 500. And you invest in these over time because they've consistently produced results and higher yields over time. However, if you want to really make it big, then you might want to do a more riskier stock. You just have to know that you may not get that money back. So be really careful by just knowing the difference and you'll be safe. So knowing the difference between a speculative stock, something that hasn't really shown its value quite yet, and more safe options. And that's basically the end of this. I know that there's just so much packed into these 10 points. There's so much that touches outside of the realm of personal finance and more into personal well-being and personal development. So if you guys want to learn more on your own time and just do things each day, I highly recommend going to YouTube and watching these videos from these people, because these, whether they're establishments, media companies, individuals, or what have you, they all have really good information and great tips about how to make personal finance fun. So for example, at Alux, they sell it as this luxury lifestyle of entrepreneurship that you can have. They sell that vision, but along the way, they teach you really important critical things that kind of separate the rich from the poor. That's one example. Nate O'Brien, he's someone who's kind of like your average Joe guy, but he tells you how he really was able to teach himself and be this like self-made millionaire entrepreneur by starting when he was literally 11 years old. So he is kind of like the demonstration of how young people can still achieve great financial success and freedom when it's typically thought of as reserved for old white men. Let's be honest. And then, yeah, Investopedia, great podcast. I like to listen to it. Yahoo Finance, also a podcast. I also like to watch their news network. Same with Fox Business News or Fox News Business. And then Ali Abdaal, he's just an individual. Practical Wisdom, they're sort of like a media brand or a company, but they give a lot of great tips too. And just sort of like insider knowledge. That's really what this all feels like. It's like a fun game full of adventure and learning. So if that's something that you like to do, then I recommend checking out those resources. But unless there's anything else I can think of, I believe that's really all I wanted to cover today. I know it was kind of dense, but I hope that it brought you some sort of value. Be sure to stay tuned on my personal finance journey, because I too myself am figuring this all out for the first time. And it can be really scary to question if you're doing the right thing. You know, how hard should you go on cryptocurrency versus how safe and sort of like, held back and reserved should I act? So it's a lot to navigate, and the risk falls completely all on me because, like I said, I don't come from money right now where it's like, if I miss rent, then there's no one, my parents can't pay that. So it's just something that I've taken as a fun adventure versus like this daunting, really scary adulting thing. But again, my name is Maddie. Thank you so much for listening today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.